Hello and welcome everyone to today's webinar. So I'm pleased to be joined by Max Brown, who is the Technical Manager at Pure Storage, who is going to be presenting today, and he's going to be discussing how to bridge or ditch the cloud divide with the Pure Storage Cloud Data Services.
Okay, thank you very much, Amy, and thank you everyone for attending this webinar. So we're just going to go through kind of exactly what we mean by ditch the cloud divide. So I'm the channel technical manager for the UK, so I focus on all things technical for our channel community, and Bytes obviously being one of our elite partners. So before I go into what I'm going to talk about, just a very brief introduction to Pure Storage for those of you who may not be familiar with who we are. So to put it very briefly, we were founded in 2009, shipped the first product in 2012. And, the founding vision was to modernize storage. So yes, we sell physical storage arrays, much like big name vendors have been doing for the last 20 or 30 years. But for us, it was about modernizing it in terms of making it more efficient, denser, easier to use, 100% flash, because, spinning disk is, beginning to go the way of the dinosaur. And especially for any critical or tier 1 or tier 2 applications you've got, disk isn't particularly the right answer. But also to change customers' experiences, which is everything from things like predictive support. 80% of our support calls are opened by our engineers seeing something that could be an anomaly and then talking to a customer about it. So this is, to put it simply, this is, prevention is better than cure. So don't call us, we'll call you. We have what we call an evergreen model. With most hardware, especially storage arrays, you find that you get locked into this never-ending cycle of buying an array, having it with 5 years support, and at the end of year 5, you either pay a huge amount in support for years 6 and 7, or you end up buying a brand new array, throw away the old one, do a data migration, and you repeat this cycle, this tech refresh cycle, which no one particularly enjoys. With our evergreen model, that never happens. You buy an array once and you would never buy another one to replace it, because as part of your support subscription, every 3 years, we refresh the key components of the hardware, mainly the storage controllers. So in other words, the array that you buy never gets old. I guess the simplest way to think of this, in some ways, it's kind of analogous to a mobile phone contract. Every 2 years, you don't have to buy a new phone, you get given a new one as part of your subscription to that service. This is exactly what we do for storage. So as it stands, we've got about 15,000 arrays deployed, 5,500 customers, I think close to 300 in the UK, ranging from the likes of the Mercedes F1 team through to Waitrose, through to Betfair, through to North Ayrshire Council, and everything in between. So we've got everything from local councils to global banks, all kind of going from what they have done to switching to Pure. So in terms of our product range, it's pretty simple. On the left hand side, you'll see the FlashArray X. This is a physical storage array that you would connect to your servers that would be running things like VMware or Hyper-V, SQL, Oracle, kind of tier 1, tier 2 critical infrastructures. We also have FlashBlade, which addresses a different part of the market. So this is your unstructured data. So this is kind of file and object. This is mainly used for high performance compute and analytics. And then tying into that, we have something called Object Engine, which we announced last week, which I'm going to talk about later on, as that kind of talks not only to FlashBlade, but also talks to the cloud. And then on the right hand side, you'll see these things called Cloud Block Store and Object Engine again. And this is where we start to offer our cloud data services. So what is it that Pure can do for your business? Some key things. So 6 nines uptime. This is proven availability. This translates to less than 30 seconds of downtime per year, which, if you had 5 nines availability, we're talking 5 minutes, which is complete system outage. For us, we are 100% flash, but it's 100% performance 100% of the time. So if you do need to do an upgrade on a physical array, it has no impact on performance. If you have some kind of failure on the array, it has no impact on performance. This is a very different experience to what customers have been used to with other storage arrays. We've made it simple to use. I mean, let's be honest, most vendors say their technology is simple, but we don't have a training course. We've made it that intuitive and that simple. There is no tuning you can do to the array. There are no specific storage decisions you have to make. It just works. The only decisions you make is how much storage should I provision to that set of servers, and that's it. And then the predictive support. this is huge. Customers don't have to worry about the array. Let us worry about things for you. And then the investment protection. So again, this goes back to our evergreen model of, the support cost stays flat forever. There's no point where you hit a certain year and then our support cost increases by 30 or 40%. What you pay in year 1 is the same in year 2, year 5, year 10, year 11, whatever. It stays the same throughout the life of the array. All of the software features are included, so you don't need to pay any extra. So even if you want to do things like geographic synchronous replication, clustering, that's all included. There are no hidden costs. And then every 3 years, we would do a platform upgrade as part of your subscription. So your storage array that you buy today would never get old. You would never have to buy a new one to replace an old one because we never let it get old. And from an economics perspective, we do data reduction. We do inline deduplication, inline compression, as well as things like encryption. And the way our storage works, it's permanently turned on. It isn't a decision that customers make. It just works. And you're still going to get sub-millisecond latency performance. And it's better than what all the other vendors have done. And we've proven this time and time again in proof of concept or bake-offs, or if I go through how our algorithm works, you'd soon understand that. Which then means there are no more migrations, no more forklift upgrades. So it is a purpose-built all-flash architecture. This wasn't designed around the world of spinning disk. This was designed 100% to only work with flash. So we have an architecture that is purpose-built from the ground up from flash. This is not a retrofit to a legacy architecture that's been around for 10 or 20 years. And the performance you get out of this includes all data services enabled. So you get the maximum performance, even though we are doing dedupe, we're doing compression, we're doing encryption, and all the other features. So it's not one of these things where you have to decide you want encryption or not, you want compression or not. It just runs, again, to make things easy for customers. So let's talk a bit about cloud data services. And, we started talking off about, ditch the cloud divide. So, Pure as a storage company are massively successful. I mean, you can look at our numbers. I think we release our full year numbers later on this week, but we have huge success, roughly growing 40% year on year, thousands of customers, we're doing it really well. So why are we looking at the cloud, right? So there was, a school of thought that said, if you're deploying Pure Storage for those tier 1 critical apps, it isn't the kind of thing you'd run in the cloud. And for some customers, the cloud strategy was an or strategy. So should I deploy some servers and storage in my data center, or should I deploy something in the cloud? And it could be very different. So you might say, well, shall I use salesforce.com, or shall I deploy a large SAP or Siebel CRM system in my data center? The right strategy is and. So even if you have a cloud first strategy, Pure still fits. But doing and, as it says, is pretty hard because let's be honest, right? The way an enterprise data center is designed, it's not very cloudy. It's not particularly real time. It can be hard to automate. It comes with a lot of cost and complexity. You're ripping and replacing other vendors' storage arrays every 5 years. You're doing data migration. So that's not a cloud-like experience. But then if you look at the cloud, it isn't particularly enterprise in terms of performance, scalability, uptime. So there is kind of a bit of a divide. There's always been a trade-off between the two. And this is, how we see the divide between what you've got on-premise or maybe hosted in a colo and the public cloud. So in your data center, you've got, packaged applications like Oracle and SQL, and they're living on virtual machines usually. You may have islands or silos of infrastructure supporting these applications. Whereas you look at in the public cloud, it's all web scale. You deploy thousands of EC2 instances. You've got load balancers spinning them up as and when you need them. It's all kind of platform as a service. Look at the management and consumption experience. So you are buying dedicated hardware to put in your data center, which is a CapEx, and then it depreciates over time. And there could be a lot of manual management and trying to make things work together. Whereas you look at the cloud, you don't buy hardware. This is the whole point. It's an on-demand, consumption-based subscription model. And generally, it's all about APIs. It's all about, using PowerShell, Python, Chef, Puppet, Ansible, REST APIs to make everything fit together. And then from a storage perspective, on-premise, again, dedicated physical storage arrays, which give you really, really high levels of reliability, lots and lots of rich features that have been in these arrays for the last couple of decades. They're very strong, very resilient, although they can be a bit complex for the other vendors. Whereas if you look at the public cloud, you don't have storage arrays. You just have, well, you let them worry about the physical storage. You have shared storage services, whether you're doing object or file and block, and it's kind of simple. There aren't a ton of features around what, the storage can do in the cloud, but it is very scalable. It kind of scales almost infinitely. So you can see where this this divide is coming, and this is why customers had to make a decision that, do I go on premise or do I go to the cloud? Whereas we want to make it and. So, the resiliency is very different between on-premise and cloud. The efficiency is very different. So with a storage array, you take Pure Storage, for example, our average data reduction is 5:1. So if you have 5 terabytes of data that you write to a Pure array from a host, we'd actually probably be writing 1 terabyte of data. So that's a 5:1 saving. Whereas if you're in the cloud and you write 5 terabytes of data, you will pay for 5 terabytes of data because it is thick provisioned. It doesn't have all the thin provisioning, the dedupe compression in the cloud. So that can put your cost up. And there's different APIs as to how you manage things. How manual is it on premise versus, how am I doing it with APIs in the cloud? So again, I think you're seeing where this cloud divide is and how we just need to bridge that gap. So customers talk about a hybrid cloud, which is really, I'm doing something on premise and I'm doing something in the public cloud. For some customers, a hybrid cloud just means that I've got a certain workload in the cloud and a certain workload on premise, and they're completely separate. What you really want is almost a hybrid application that can span both the public cloud and your on-premise data center. But in order to build, what we call a data-centric architecture, because if you think about it, data is the value in your business, right? It's not the physical hardware that you buy or the services from someone, it's the data. Without data, your business is nothing. Without hardware, it gets difficult, right? But if you have the data, you have the business. So for data-centric architecture, it needs to be fast and shared. It needs to be on demand. Things just need to happen. It needs to be automated. It's got to be globally reliable, right? We need to give you insane levels of availability and performance, and hybrid by design. So you can choose to do something on premise or you can choose to do cloud and have the architectures very similar. And it's constantly improving because there are advancements in technology. So this is where we start to introduce Pure's cloud data services. So again, this is kind of bridging that gap. On the left-hand side in the picture, you can see the physical storage arrays that we've been selling for the last 6 years, 15,000 of them deployed, very, very successful, but we had no offering in the cloud. So now what we have are 3 key offerings: Cloud Block Store, Cloud Snap, and Object Engine. So Cloud Block Store, excuse me, I guess the simplest way to explain this, again, if you look on the left-hand side, on-premise, Pure Storage flash arrays, physical storage arrays, and they run the code that runs inside the array, that's basically the brains behind it, is called Purity. That's the code that runs inside a Pure Storage array, and that's the code that does everything from all of the in-depth storage calculations to the dedupe, compression, encryption. That's the code that is the magic behind a Pure Storage flash array. Very simply, what we've done is we've ported that code, or kind of converted it so it runs in AWS as 100% software. So now what you've got is Purity running in AWS. This means that whatever you did on premise, so again, in terms of monitoring that array, supporting that array, and all of our arrays phone home to this thing called Pure One, which is a global management and kind of monitoring and analytics view of your storage arrays. It's the same if you're running it in the cloud. If you've written some REST API scripts, or maybe you're using Chef or Puppet, Ansible, whatever it is, and you've written some scripts that talk to a physical Pure array in a colo or data center, those same scripts can be used running in the cloud because it's exactly the same thing. If you're plugging into any kind of CloudFormation templates with AWS, or you're plugging into VMware, and again, this might be later in the year with VMware Cloud, but again, the same things will tie together. So you're not having to redo things. For a lot of customers, when they say, I'm going to move my apps to the cloud, it's a massive re-architect, and it's a huge thing to go through. But with Cloud Block Store, the key thing about it, number one, it's 100% software. To see the actual difference between Cloud Block Store and a physical Pure array, if you logged into the management GUI of either one, there's only one logo where you would spot that it's actually different, because it's 100% the same. Every single feature that you can do on a physical Pure array, and have been doing for the last 6 years, you can do in the cloud. There are a few other vendors that kind of do something similar of running a virtual version of their array in the cloud, but there's a lot of caveats. You know, everything that you can do with one of their physical arrays, you can't do everything in the cloud. We decided this has got to be an all or nothing approach. We need to make sure that if you are doing snapshots and replication in your physical data centers, you can do exactly the same snapshots and replication in AWS. So, you know, it deploys instantly as a virtual appliance, takes about 20 minutes to spin up, and then when you finish with it, you can turn it off, right? So turn it off and on as much as you like. You get all the efficiencies because it's the exact same code. So again, I mentioned our data reduction, an average of 5:1. So if I had 5 terabytes of data written to a physical Pure Storage flash array, it would consume 1 terabyte on that Pure Storage array. If I was to then use Cloud Block Store, so now I've got a kind of virtual array running in AWS, that same 5 terabytes that I now write to Cloud Block Store in AWS will consume 1 terabyte in AWS. So you've now got roughly a 5x saving on your cloud storage, because all the dedupe, the compression, the thin provisioning, all of the algorithms that we use, exactly the same. We have not changed them to be different for AWS. This also means you could migrate bidirectionally between a physical array in a colo or data center and also with Cloud Block Store running Purity in the cloud. As I mentioned, the APIs are the same. So if you've developed something in your data center, it's going to be really easy to port that to the cloud, because you're not going from, let's say, servers with LUNs attached via iSCSI from a Pure Storage array, and then you're changing to using, you know, Amazon EBS or S3 and EC2, which is a completely different concept. In terms of availability, so I'll touch on this in the next slide, but you know, we can actually give you better availability than what Amazon can actually deliver. Plus, you're going to get, you know, the data at rest encryption, so we're adding a further level of security, and it is flexible. It's a pay-as-you-go consumption model. So, you know, you just pay for what you actually want to use. You know, some of the things that have turned people off from maybe putting their enterprise type applications in the cloud, simple things like it's quite expensive, right? The cloud bill starts small, but it gets bigger and bigger and bigger. And I'm not sure it's actually worth the cost of putting things in the cloud. Reliability in the cloud is not that high. If you look at the SLAs that you sign up to with AWS and someone like Azure, it generally tends to be, you know, 99.99% or 99.95. So you're looking at, you know, between 4 and 8 hours of potential downtime per year, which could translate to a lot of outages. And admittedly, you get a service credit, but is that service credit worth it if your business has been down for 2 hours? That could be a lot of revenue lost. So things like, you know, what we can do is we can actually make the cloud better than what it is without actually kind of changing what AWS or Azure do with their infrastructure. So for example, Amazon has a concept of something called AZs, or AZs as they call it, availability zones, which is actually just, you know, geographical data centers with high-speed links between them. So what we could do is we have a product called Active Cluster, which is kind of a metro clustering solution. So today we deploy that on premise, where you would have 2 arrays separated with a synchronous replication link with transparent failover and clustering between 2 separate physical arrays. We'll be able to do that with AWS and then Azure probably at the end of this year or next year. So now, instead of having 4 nines availability, you're going to get 6 nines availability. So if an entire availability zone went down in AWS, you know, your applications, depending on how they're architected, may not even notice it happened, because you already have another instance that's running simultaneously in a completely separate availability zone. So we've just massively increased the uptime and reliability of Amazon by using our own technology. In terms of data reduction, I kind of mentioned this, but you know, ordinarily 5 terabytes of data in EBS or S3 will cost you 5 terabytes. That's kind of how it works. But if you're storing that 5 terabytes in Cloud Block Store on AWS, then you're going to be paying for something like 1 terabyte of storage. So this has massively reduced your AWS costs. Plus the way we do snapshots. So let's say today you've got a 1 terabyte database in AWS. And if you wanted to create 10 copies of that databases, that would cost you 10 terabytes of capacity in AWS. So not going to be cheap. However, if that terabyte database is living in Cloud Block Store in AWS, and you use the features within the Cloud Block Store virtual array to take array-based snapshots, then the way that we do this, it's just metadata pointers. All we do is track the change blocks. So suddenly 10 copies of your database may only consume, well, it could be easily less than a terabyte. So instead of paying 10 terabytes, you might be paying for 1.1 terabytes of space. So it makes things a lot more effective to start actually running enterprise applications and enterprise deployments in AWS. So although you might think, are we taking money away from AWS? Well, actually, no, we're not. What we're actually doing is we're helping AWS introduce enterprise customers to the cloud that may have kind of shied away from it before, because we can now give AWS some enterprise class capabilities that it's never had before, such as saving money because of dedupe and compression, giving better availability through using Active Cluster, being able to spin up more copies of test and dev environments without it being a big kind of cost impact. And then you've got the encryption side. So through Cloud Block Store, all of the data is encrypted at rest. So now we're adding extra levels of security to customers' data that they want to run in the cloud. So now one of the other components of our cloud data service is something we announced last week called Object Engine, which is what we call the industry's first flash to cloud platform. So this is revolving around data protection, around backups and restores and reuse of data. So if you look at how data is changing, and now I'm thinking about things from a backup perspective. So in the old days, backup was an insurance policy. I've got my data, I backed it up to tape and I put it in Iron Mountain just in case something went wrong, or I had to keep, data cold for some regulatory perspective. But now the modern way of looking at data protection, it's more about data management. It's about saying, right, well, I need to, I've backed up my data, but I don't just want backup being stagnant. I want to actually reuse that backup data. Can I use it in a warm environment? Can I get value out of this, this pool of backup data that I've had for years? And then, the cloud economics start to come into it. So people would rather start doing some kind of backup or tiering to the cloud rather than just using tapes or disk. So I think everyone's heard of disk to tape. This is the traditional way that things have been done. And the problem is that, so when we say PBBA, that stands for purpose-built backup appliance. There are many vendors that have their own backup appliance, which is dedicated to doing one job and one job only, and that's backup. I think what some of these have tended to ignore is backup appliances tend to be pretty fast at doing backup, but it's the recovery, it's the restore that becomes the issue. So if you had to do a huge recovery or restore, it could be pretty slow, which means you're going to miss SLAs. You might even be wanting to use your backup appliance to actually kind of spin up on-demand copies of test and dev environments, but again, that could be slow. And then, you might be using another backup appliance offsite to kind of, be more secure with your data. So now I've got lots of these backup appliances that do one job only, bit of a one-trick pony, can be costly. And then if you are doing this to tape, well, tape is the ultimate in kind of paranoia. You can't do anything with it. It lives in some vault somewhere. And the problem there is, tape rotation. What happens when the tape becomes old and you have to replace it with a newer format of tape? You have to kind of recycle all these tapes. So it's a big problem. Whereas we are saying, well, why don't we do something that's in the 21st century? Flash to cloud makes sense. So you have your on-premise primary flash array, which we've sold 15,000 of, many customers using them. But now what we have is on-premise, we have rapid recovery from a deduplication flash store for your most recent data. So now instead of most vendors recovery times, if they can do a terabyte an hour or 2 or 3 terabytes an hour, they think that's quite fast. We can do 15 terabytes an hour. We are an order of magnitude faster than all of the other backup appliances in the market today, which means you could now use us to spin up test and dev environments using your backup data rather than production data. And you can do it quick. But then also, instead of going disk to tape, we're going flash to cloud. So now you've got the cloud economics. So now we can natively replicate the data from your on-premise deduplication flash store to an S3 target, which in this case, could be AWS. Later on in the year, it will be Azure, and then some other offerings. But because it's sitting in kind of S3, this means we could actually use your backup software to take copies of it in the cloud, spin it up, and actually reuse that data. Don't let it sit there and be stagnant. Actually make some value out of that data that you've backed up to the cloud as well. So what is Object Engine? So the way it looks today, it's a physical 4-node appliance. You can kind of see there's kind of 2 nodes in each one of those chassis in the picture, but it's a 4-node appliance, does 25 terabytes an hour backup, 15 terabytes an hour restore, and just those 4 nodes could support up to 15 petabytes of capacity, of front-end capacity. But it does scale out, so it does scale out to hundreds of petabytes. There's almost kind of no limit to the architecture. So so what this does, as your backup application, so such as Veritas, Veeam, Commvault, it would talk to Object Engine, and Object Engine would do the deduplication inline. So again, this is going to save you a lot of money if you're backing up to on-premise flash, or if you're backing up to the cloud. So what Object Engine will be able to do is not only back up locally to some very fast flash for very rapid restores, it will also tier some of that data off to the cloud at whatever policy you decide in your backup application. So now you've got the 11 nines of durability in the cloud, and it's one global namespace. Everything is fully deduped. So let's kind of step through some of this. So you can see on site A, I've got my production application running on a Pure Storage physical flash array. And then let's say in this example, we're using something like Veritas or Veeam to talk to Object Engine as your on-premise backup appliance. But also, let's forget backup. Let's think about restore, right? So data protection is not business protection. Business protection is if something goes wrong, how rapidly can I recover my environments? That's what's key. It's no good finding out that when, something's gone really bad, that it's going to take you an age to get things back. So now we can do rapid restore locally, really quick. This is what customers have wanted for years. But then what we can then do is say, well, rapid restore for maybe the last full backup and few incrementals or the last couple of weeks. But then anything beyond that, I want to use the cloud. I don't want to store things on tapes and ship them off and ship them back because that's very inefficient. So now via Object Engine, because we've deduped the data as it comes in, we're now sending this deduped backup data to the cloud, to another S3 target in AWS. So again, that's going to save you a lot of money. But your backup software can also be running in the cloud and can talk to Object Engine to actually say, well, we could actually reuse this backup data. We could take a copy of it. We could spin it up into a sandbox environment. So it's not sitting there stagnant. You can actually get value out of that data. And then let's take, for example, another site. So now I've got a site B running completely different applications, but in this instance, it's using Commvault for backup. Now, the advantage with Object Engine is it's one global namespace across all of the environments, whether they're on-premise or whether they're in cloud. So this means that I'm getting dedupe. I'm getting the benefits of dedupe across Veritas, across Veeam, across Commvault. If you talk to Oracle DBAs, they prefer to do their own RMAN backups and don't want to deal with a backup software. So instead of having silos of deduplication from each vendor or silos of dedupe per each vendor's backup appliance, we are doing a massively global dedupe across all of your environments, all of your backup software, all of your database software, across one central global namespace. So you're going to get huge amount of savings across this entire environment, whether you're doing it locally on premise or whether you're doing it to the cloud. And it really is down to you how you want to protect your business. So you could be running the Object Engine. I mean, today, Object Engine, it's a 4-node cluster, but it scales out and it backs up to FlashBlade, but can also back up to the cloud. Towards the end of the year, the Object Engine will be available as software only that you could run in the cloud. So a little bit of history, because you may spot on this. Object Engine is based on software called Store Reduce, which is an acquisition that Pure made about 6 months ago, which we've now kind of put together with our hardware and kind of renamed it Object Engine. So you could be running Object Engine as a physical appliance in your data centers, but you could also be running it later this year as software in the cloud. So you could actually have a cloud-first strategy where you have no Pure hardware. So you could deploy anything you want in the cloud, and then you could have, Veritas, Veeam, or Commvault running in the cloud or on premise, but backing up to the cloud using Object Engine in the cloud. You could then deploy Cloud Block Store. So you can be 100% cloud first, have no infrastructure whatsoever, but you're still getting all the benefits of Pure Storage and all of its enterprise class functionality. So in terms of scaling out, you can see in the diagram on the left, you can scale out your Object Engine nodes, or you can scale out your FlashBlade storage, which sits underneath Object Engine for rapid restore, or you could be scaling out in the cloud. Add more Object Engine virtual instances via kind of EC2 instances, and then just add S3 capacity as and when required. So, I mean, you know, I don't like to call out the competition. It's kind of unfair at times, but Data Domain, you know, they're kind of one of the biggest well-known in the industry. And, you know, because we have, you know, everything we do is 100% flash, and it's, you know, looking to the future. It's having the strategy where, you know, everything that we do is, you know, you can restore on-premise or in the cloud. We're not kind of a little gateway box. It gives you full functionality. So the way that Pure do things, we either do it 100% right or we don't do it at all. So scalability has to scale with customers' environments. It has to be really, really fast. You know, the global encryption, it's not kind of done in little silos. And the data reuse, again, that's very key, that customers need to be able to do something with their data rather than it just sitting dormant in a backup tier. And it's very easy to use. So if you've ever used Pure Storage before, you may be familiar with the Pure One interface. Object Engine will tie into that. So the same management framework that you've been using for your Pure Storage arrays is exactly the same for Object Engine. So in terms of our go-to-market partners, it is these three major vendors, Commvault, Veeam, and Veritas, which all talk to Pure. We're going to be releasing some white papers on this shortly. I think there's some videos already on YouTube, but you know, we'll be going through a lot more updates for how these things fit together. But simply put, things like Veritas and Commvault and Veeam, all we need to do is tell them to back up to a new storage target, and the new storage target is your S3 bucket address, which would be Object Engine. So it isn't a massive change to how you deploy these things. It's just a new storage tier for these backup vendors. One other thing to mention though is Object Engine is a 4-node cluster, and it's the compute nodes. Underneath it is the storage called FlashBlade. Now, FlashBlade isn't just the storage for Object Engine. The whole point of FlashBlade is what we call a data hub. You can do many, many things with this. So not only could I say, well, actually, I'm using it for Object Engine. If you've got capacity or you want to put more blades into our FlashBlade system, you could then deploy data warehouses. So maybe you want to move your Oracle Exadata environment onto FlashBlade. Maybe you're doing big data lake analytics as things like SAS or Apache Spark, or maybe you're building an AI cluster. So the whole point is that Object Engine does one job. It does deduplication for S3, which makes it a perfect backup target. But also the FlashBlade sitting underneath Object Engine can be used for multiple purposes. So you can now start to consolidate a lot of your big data workloads onto the same FlashBlade where your Object Engine resides as well. So now you have multiple uses for it. So this is, you know, kind of, you know, what we see is the modern era of data protection. I mean, disk to tape is something that's probably a good 15, 20 years old. And it's about time the industry woke up and said, this is not the future. You should not be doing things like this. It's all about flash and it's all about cloud. So if we can do flash to cloud, that's the perfect answer to give you rapid restore, to actually save money on your cloud economics because of the way we reduce the data, and then to actually reuse your data. Don't just let it sit there and be stagnant. So kind of just wrapping things up in terms of how Pure unifies cloud. So again, you know, let's ditch that cloud divide. Let's bridge the gap between what you're doing on premise and what you could do with our cloud data services in AWS. So Cloud Block Store, the ability to run our Purity array software in the cloud. So now you've got a full featured 100% the same as a physical array, but it's running on AWS. So now we can make AWS better than what it is today. You've got Cloud Snap, which is, I didn't kind of cover it in this one, but it's pretty simple. It's taking array-based snapshots, but storing them in the cloud rather than storing them on the array. And then there's Object Engine, which is our flash to cloud, rapid restore kind of backup appliance. So, you know, in terms of building your cloud, it isn't a decision of should I do it in a data center or should I do it in the cloud? Just to give you a quick bit on timelines for these things. So Object Engine was released, actually was announced last week. It should be released in the next couple of weeks. Cloud Snap is available today. Cloud Block Store should be around the July timeframe. So the next question I usually get is, well, what about Azure? So we've gone with AWS first because That's where we built all of our own internal infrastructures. So, you know, we've got 11 petabytes of our own data sitting in AWS. So we know how to work with AWS. And from a US perspective, it was the biggest market share. In EMEA, we see Azure massively gaining ground. So our offerings for Azure Blob should be around the end of this year, maybe start of next, but I'm hoping the end of this year. And then eventually we'll look at things like Google Cloud Platform. So, you know, truly with Pure, you can build your cloud anywhere you want. You can run things anywhere you want. You can move data between on-premise and between cloud block store. And with Object Engine, you're protecting on-premise and you're protecting in the cloud. So we've really kind of ditched that gap between on-premise and the cloud. And hopefully this has kind of made a bit of sense to you. So with that, does anyone have any questions they'd like to raise?
Brilliant, thanks, Max. Yeah, if you do have any questions, there is a questions box just at the right-hand side of your screen. I think we've had a couple already come through. So the first question says, if Purity is designed for Flash architecture, how has it had to be re-engineered to use S3 backend, and how does that impact performance?
Yeah, okay, so the way we've architected it, so the way that a Pure Storage physical flash array works, it's a dual controller architecture, and basically under the covers, those controllers are running Linux. So our controllers in the cloud are 2 EC2 instances. Now, in order to get a good level of performance, because S3 is very resilient, but it's not very performant, what we've got is we've kind of created a middle layer where we're using extra EC2 instances with local SSD 0 storage to accelerate things as kind of a read caching layer. So obviously with a Pure Storage array, we have NVRAM devices. You don't have NVRAM devices in the cloud. So what we're doing to accelerate things is to use additional EC2 instances with local SSDs to accelerate the performance. And then obviously you've got S3 as the back end. So performance-wise, the chance of you getting sub-millisecond latencies in the cloud is very, very slim indeed. But the way we can scale out, we're definitely going to get good latencies. We're still doing a lot of performance testing. I think we're seeing kind of, you know, we're definitely seeing sub 5 milliseconds, but, you know, you're not going to, it's going to be hard to get sub-millisecond latencies out of the cloud. I mean, hopefully we can achieve that, but it does come down a lot to some of the cloud infrastructures. So it's going to be hard to be as fast as on-premise, but we're kind of giving you that flexibility. So as we start to scale out EC2, then hopefully that will start to come.
Thanks, Max. And there is another question here that says, can I run a cloud block store without an on-premise Pure array?
Absolutely, yep, absolutely. So this is, you know, so this goes back to the kind of, you know, this isn't an or decision, this is an and decision. So I could run cloud block store, sorry, I could run a Pure Storage FlashArray in a data center, or I could run it as software. So, you know, there is no requirement for you to have anything on premise. You know, your first Pure purchase could be cloud block store. And I think, you know, we may see this being a really good advantage for customers that say, I think I want to spend a lot of money on Pure and replace my existing storage arrays in my data center, but how can I test it? I mean, obviously we're happy to do proof of concepts, but an easier way might be to say, well, actually, you can deploy cloud block store in a matter of minutes. You know, obviously you've got to pay a bit of license cost and pay Amazon, but you know, we could have a customer who is 100% cloud, but is 100% Pure. So yes, you can absolutely deploy cloud block store without any Pure physical hardware on premise anywhere.
Okay, thank you, Max. So I think that's all the questions we have today. So thank you everyone for joining. I really hope you found the webinar valuable, and thank you, Max, for presenting the webinar today for everyone. So as mentioned at the beginning, there are a couple of questions at the end. So if you would like any further information, or if you've got any feedback for us, we'd really appreciate it. Just pop that in there and we will get back to you. And I'll be sending you all a link to the recording either this afternoon or tomorrow morning. Okay, so thank you again, everyone, and enjoy the rest of your day today. Thank you.